Hi, friends. This is Hannah. This week's episode is going to sound a little bit different than usual. So instead of doing a triad this week, we are releasing an interview that I conducted with my friend Matthew about communism, its history, and Matthew's organization, Independent Socialist Group. The original recording was intended to be a 3-part VSE series, but then I remembered that my thesis is due in less than 3 weeks, and I panicked. So enjoy this week's discussion of communism. Okay, so Shannon just came and saved us because I'm an idiot and I don't understand technology. Okay, so for today's very special episode, I have with me my friend Matthew. And Matthew, I know I've asked you this 1,000 times, but I literally cannot do French. So could you please say your last name for everybody?
You speak German, but you can't learn the French yet.
Listen, it's really hard for me.
That's okay. My last name is La Jeunesse. It is French.
See, there's like 14 other vowels in there, so it doesn't make you French people, you Quebecois. I can't even.
I don't know what to tell you. You Germans have to capitalize every noun, so here we are.
It makes sense, though. It's an important noun. Also, look at Irish. It's just such bullshit.
and Welsh. So,
oh God,
we're not like that.
Well. It could be worse. You could be Welsh. Okay, so today, in our very special, Matthew and I will be talking about communism. So if we think about, I know that I've said this 100 times, but my other, if I had another podcast, it would definitely be a political podcast. And so now I'm just living out my dream in these mini episodes. And so my first political, representative today will be Matthew, and he will tell us all about his group and what communism means to him and things like that. So do you want to kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Hannah, for your introduction. So, like we said before, my name is Matthew Lajeunesse, and I'm with the Independent Socialist Group. We are a United States-based Trotskyist communist organization. So we are part of a Committee for Workers International, which is the international organization that includes 17 countries, including the United States, Britain, India, Nigeria. I have comrades around the world, basically. And so our aim, of course, is to educate and advocate for a socialist world. So when we talk about the word communism, oftentimes there is this kind of negative connotation. A lot of the things that come to mind, and I know, Hannah, you've been reading a lot about the gulags lately.
Yeah, but those are Stalinists, so
Yeah, but that's what comes to mind is the Stalinism.
Yeah, please tell us the difference between Stalinism and communism, because there is a huge difference.
Yeah, there's a massive difference. And in order to kind of go into that, though, I just want to bring up a little bit of history about the Russian Revolution itself and what it was trying to achieve and how it got to Stalinism, because you can't really explain Stalinism without that. And so when the Russian Revolution initially happened, led by people like Lenin, like Trotsky, the aim was to be part of an international revolution. There was a similar movements going on in Germany, and they were very much heavily relying on Germany's revolution to actually succeed, and it didn't. It was betrayed by the Social Democratic Party. It's the leaders of the communist leaders of this revolution, like Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, were assassinated um, by the Social Democratic Party, um, and the German Revolution was crushed, to say the least. So that left only Russia, that had a successful um, communist revolt. Um, a lot of the thinking behind that, of course, is to um, the way that communism works as an ideology is it's a process. Um, it doesn't communism doesn't occur overnight. So when you have the revolutionary task of overthrowing capitalism, or in the case of Russia, it was Tsarism. It was still a monarchy. It was a backwards place, and this is kind of why they were relying on Germany to succeed, because they needed um, the some of the knowledge and the technology that Germany already had in place in order to have a successful, sustained um, communist reign. And when that didn't happen, and when Lenin died, there was this huge power vacuum and this huge responsibility on the Bolsheviks and the Communist Party. And the way that Stalin comes to power is very interesting. Joseph Stalin had been a Bolshevik for quite some time, and he was very good at something. And it's something that I'm actually not very good at, and it is recruiting. Um, and what happens in Russia at the time is the people who have the education to be administrators are mostly old bureaucrats of the Tsarist regime who get recruited by the general secretary, who was Stalin, because he was very good at recruitment. So after Lenin's death and the Politburo started deciding on who would be in charge of the Soviet Union, um, Stalin had the backing of so many people because he had recruited them, he had brought them to his side. And Stalin, once he's doing this, has to come up with a new philosophy, because the whole idea, once again, of this Bolshevik revolution is to build international communism, and it's not going to happen. The revolutions across the world got crushed. Um, so him and Bukharin, another Bolshevik, really develop on this theory of socialism in one country. And socialism in one country put the interests of the Soviet Union ahead of the working class internationally. So, whatever was good for the survival of the Soviet Union was the policy that they took. Um, and according to Stalin, that meant removing political rivals like Leon Trotsky, who was a Bolshevik who he became a Bolshevik in 1917. He had kind of split between the Bolshevik and Menshevik party for some time, um, but was a dedicated internationalist, um, and was the prominent opponent of Joseph Stalin um, up until his death by assassination as ordered by Stalin in 1940.
Dang, you are very knowledgeable in this. Um, so, oh my god, I had a question and now I totally forgot. And now I'm going to sound like a total dipshit.
That's okay. They can edit this part out.
Yes, Shannon, please make me sound smart. All right, so with that history in mind, yeah, and okay, I have a question for you,
Mhm.
or I don't know, just your thoughts on this. But you always hear that phrase, that oh yeah, communism is a great idea on paper, but in practice, blah blah blah, it doesn't work. How do you react to that? How does your group sort of respond to that as you know, we're seeing more and more I mean, especially recently, hatred of even the term socialism.
So a lot of the people who make those claims are like, yeah, I read the Communist Manifesto. Marxism is comprised of so much more than that. Um, it was written in 1848. It is a work that Marx later reflected on and made corrections to based off particularly the Paris Commune in 1871, when he made some famous edits to it then. But this human nature argument is something that is constantly addressed by Marx, and we can see it addressed historically as well. How many times do you see um, they're kind of dystopian feel good stories of people contributing to help a community member when systems fail, right? When health insurance won't pay. People are naturally actually very inclined to help each other. Human beings as a species is social. They are very social in nature. We came together. And in fact, the earliest human societies were what Engels would refer to as uh, um, oh goodness, why is the term escaping me? Um, but it based primitive communism. That's the term. Engels would describe it as primitive communism. They lived in these hunter-gatherer societies, working for each other constantly. This is before the rise of class society. Once class comes into it, which is a result of the agricultural revolution, um, the people who had control of the land and had control of the food all of a sudden had more power. Um, and that's not a natural thing. They built it, this society where no longer is it everyone working for each other. It's I have the resources, you have to work for me. Um, that is not human nature. The vast majority of history, humans have been living in these social societies which contribute to one another, and the rise of class antagonisms is, from a historical perspective, an actually recent phenomenon.
Yeah, I was I don't know, I took like a history class 1,000 years ago, and it was basically all like talking about how, yeah, the class structure arises after the agricultural revolution, but also so do things like um like in hunter-gatherer societies, and this is something that you can probably speak on too, because I know you're a feminist as well. Um, in hunter-gatherer societies, we always hear this thing of like, oh, the women stayed behind and did the gathering and the men did the hunting. That wasn't really true. It was just whoever had the ability uh, took the work that was necessary for the community to survive. Um, but yeah, that's a really interesting thing.
Yeah, and Engels addresses that in I forgot to mention the work that I was citing there, and it's I always get the order of these mixed up, but it's the origin of the state, private. Goodness gracious, the origin of state, private property, and the family, in which he addresses that, in fact, yeah, women held the same level and oftentimes higher levels than men, because before people actually understood um, how the birthing process worked, um, people thought, oh, women can give birth. They didn't know at first that, oh, it's only women who are um, having social relations, to put it in a more polite term here, um, who are
Let's just say whatever
giving
you want
birth.
on this
And
podcast.
so I know, I,
We
you know,
we had a
it's
whole
the cap.
episode that was about a horse's butthole, so I mean, it is what it is.
It is what it is. But yeah, he addresses that, and that rise of the family as we see it today. It's breaking. We're starting to see, at least in some countries, a more equal approach. Um, but it, the whole structure of the family, and anything that makes a class society function has to be reinforced. So the current family structure is the way it is to reinforce capitalism. Before that, it was reinforced for feudalism. And you and I, Hannah, we both have our experience as Catholic members of the church, and we know the church's history of being a kind of reactionary force in its early in its very early years, and oftentimes still even now. Um, but the structure of the family and the church itself was used to reinforce feudalism.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. That's another fun fact. Matthew and I are both Catholic. Um,
Yeah, that's a strange combination, Catholic communist.
yeah, I
People
really
don't
wanted
see
to
that.
ask you more about that too. But for now, I'm going to just mark this for Shannon. So this will be the end of our first mini episode, and then we'll just keep talking and we'll move on. So let's make like a little ending, I guess.
Okay.
Matthew, thank you for joining me on this very special episode, and we will see you on my next very special episode to continue this conversation.
It's my pleasure, Hannah. Thank you.
All right, goodbye. All right, hello. We're back. This is the continuation of my conversation with Matthew, the communist. Just kidding, but whatever. I don't know.
I mean, I
How would you?
am Matthew, and I am a communist, so it works.
What title would you like to have? Do you
Didn't we
wanna?
come up with something one time on a Facebook chat? My comradeliness, was that it?
Oh yes, my comradeliness. Yes, I love that. What's the word? Epitaph. My comradeliness. Beautiful. All right, so I'm joined by my comradeliness, Matthew. Um, and we are going to continue our discussion on communism and socialism and all of that good stuff. So when we last left off, we were talking about the early years of communism and feminism a little bit and just some history. So now, what should we talk about now?
Well, one of the things I know that you wanted to talk about, we've kind of discussed Stalinism, but we never got a chance to discuss what communism actually looks
Right. Let's do that.
So as far as communism goes, it's um, the another term for it often is scientific socialism. You see that more in the 1800s before Marx dies because it wasn't called Marxism yet. But it was to separate from um, the socialists who were then labeled utopian socialists of the past, which who you can kind of more relate to our social democrats. They believe that you could vote socialism in, and the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, would willingly give up power through their own democratic structures if socialism was elected into power. Um, Very idealistic, would not happen. Uh, Marx points out that in order to overthrow this class society, you have to smash it. You have to smash the state machinery, a lesson that he learned from the 1871 Paris Commune, which we briefly mentioned in the last episode, um, and that the working class has to seize the means of production in order to have a um, economy where the distribution of goods and the production of goods is organized by the community and by the working class, who are the ones who actually create the value of everything, whether it's a service or a product. Um, when Marx was developing what communism was, capitalism was in its very early days. It had arose in England. Adam Smith was really the first to write a comprehensive book about free market capitalism, The Wealth of Nations, back in 1776, before Marx's time. Um, but capitalism is very new, and there's still plenty of instances of feudalism during Marx's time, including Austria, which is really the bastion of the old guard at that time, and Russia. Um, and so, in these very new capitalist societies, he noted the differences where you have a worker in a factory. It was mostly factories in those capitalist countries. You have the worker who is creating the product, and the product has value. It has money value, and it also has a use value. Um, you're not going to sell a product that does not have use, but the value of the product is what is by the labor. They are the ones who make it. The people who own the factories have very little actually to do with creating the product, distributing the product, or any space of the actual creating of goods. Um, and in here, this is why it's called capitalism. The reason that they're able to control it is they quote unquote own the factories. So um, the the workers are being paid less than the value of their labor in order to create a profit for the owners of the factories. This can also include shareholders and those kinds of things. So Marx envisioned a society in which the workers take control and are actually given the full value of their labor, because they do have the ability to organize society. They do have the ability and the knowledge and the skills to do it. They're just prevented from doing so because previously someone had accumulated more wealth in order to get ownership of land and capital, which created which is the current class system. So you have the two classes. You have the working class and the bourgeoisie. There's a petit bourgeois in the middle that's kind of like your kind of middle class or small business owners. But that's kind of the antagonism that you see. Um, and communism's goal is to, first of all, smash the capitalist state and create a socialist state. Socialism, Marx referred to it as the lowest stage of communism. There's still a state. It's still the workers still aren't getting the full value of their labor, because you can't just do that overnight. There requires a process, and there requires a state to fight reaction. As time marches forward, the idea is that as humankind is conditioned on how to run a society in which all needs are met and nobody is having power over one another, the state slowly withers away. And that's something that Lenin expands upon in The State and Revolution. But that can't happen until after the capitalist class is defeated. And when we were talking about Stalinism, Stalin did the exact opposite. He had a country which wasn't even socialist in nature, but claimed it was communism. And instead of having a state that was withering away, he was in fact making it increasingly bureaucratic.
Yeah. I've been reading, like you said, because my thesis has everything to do with like Russian prison systems. But yesterday I read half of this book called Gulag Boss, which is a Soviet memoir of someone who ran and operated one of these prison camps up in kind of like, it's in the Arctic Circle north of St. Petersburg. But it's so incredible the amount of fear-based, I don't even know, just like how everyone was controlled by fear of the state. Because at one point they're trying to get up to this camp and they have a horse that gets stuck in the mud, and they're like, well, if we don't get this horse out of the mud, we are ourselves going, because they were the bosses, we are ourselves going to be sentenced to 10 years hard labor for what did they call it? I gotta find this. It was like destroying state property or something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah, and it's a very important distinction as well. In the Soviet Union, the state wasn't run by the workers, which means it's not a socialist country. And I don't want to just dwell on the bad parts of the Soviet Union either, because the Soviet Union also had a lot of accomplishments, which I think need to be noted as well, including the industrialization of the countries that comprised the Soviet Union, because they had previously been feudal and mainly agrarian. Education did go up, the healthcare did get better, but that does not excuse by any means the atrocities committed under Stalinism and the following bureaucratic regimes of
Yeah,
Khrushchev and Gorbachev and everything else.
yeah. It was called plundering of socialist property, um, the term. But yeah, I think it's important to also, recognize the accomplishments that were achieved, but at the same time, remembering that a lot of it was um, came about, especially just I'm specifically talking about the Stalinist state, that it came about in such a I don't know, problematic way.
Oh yeah.
Okay, but let's continue talking then about our have we covered everything you meant to talk about? Sorry.
We'll probably maybe for the first episode, I didn't get a lot of time to talk about Trotsky and his
Oh yeah, we
ideas.
can go back and do
But we'll
that.
while we're on the topic of accomplishments, we may want to just include um, the the accomplishments of like Cuba and Burkina Faso. And this is something that a lot of people fail to address. Oftentimes, they talk about the atrocities committed in a lot of these countries without having a historical concept for what these countries were like before. Let's take Cuba, for example. Um, a lot of people talk about the Cuban Revolution and how bad it was, and how many people were killed, and how many people fled to the United States. Um, the people who fled to the United States are people who owned slaves and plantations. They are people who were of the worst sort. The government that was in Cuba prior to the revolution was a US puppet regime that was uh, even more um, strongly um, dictatorial under Batista than it was ever under Castro. Um, and so when Castro comes to power and removes this puppet regime, there are problems in Cuba, but let's talk about some of the good things that happened. The literacy rate in Cuba now is 99%. That's better than the United States. They are a leader in medical care. They have a vaccine for lung cancer, probably so they can smoke their cigars, but they did the research. Um, and
I mean, if
out
you
of
put the work in, it's
Yeah,
all you.
exactly. We don't have that though. They take it seriously. They're distributing resources for community needs. Um, and a lot of the people who experience repression in these countries are people who want to bring back a repressive system. Um, but like um, with that vaccine, they also just have a lot of medical knowledge. They give the most international medical aid per capita of any country. um, they really have been a leader in the world stage, and it has its problems. It had, especially with like homophobia, um, and eh, but these are also issues that take time to defeat. If there was a communist revolution in America tomorrow, and we overthrew the government, and we have this socialist state, the problems of racism, sexism, all these things are not going to disappear overnight. This is why the state needs to wither away slowly. We need to make sure that we are addressing the problems that are stemming from the old society before just letting it dissolve into a stateless, classless society. Otherwise, we're going to end up right back where we started. Um, but another country, very similar.
Really quick, can I ask you how things like religion play into that? Because that's always been something I've wondered. Like, how do you tackle these issues of um, morality while also juggling this new, like like you said, if we were to overthrow the government tomorrow, what would that look like in terms of like people still being um, religious or
Mhm.
having, I don't know, being, I don't know. Try to make me sound like I know what I'm talking about, Matthew.
Yeah. So, as far as religion, and I think a lot of people, especially in religious communities, can feel alienated in socialist organizations. There's that very famous Marx quote that religion is the opiate of the masses. Um, that is a condensed version of the quote, where he's actually talking about what we had talked about before, where the religious institutions, such as the Catholic Church, were reinforcing the um, unjust societies that were in place at the time. Um, and while Marx himself was an atheist, and while many, many socialists, particularly in Western countries, are atheists, I don't see it as um, a conflict between my faith and my politics. In fact, if anything, to me, they reinforce themselves. Um, when we talk about a lot of religious values, not just in uh, for you and me as Catholics, but also in um, religions such as Islam, Judaism, Jainism. Um, you can see these values reflected in communism. We want a society that provides for the needs of everybody. We want a society that no person is oppressed, um, where we're all equal. In our faith, you know, one of the things that we often hear is that we're all children of God. Um, in socialism, we're all supposed to be equal. We're all supposed to help each other. That's a reinforcement to me, and that's a reinforcement to a lot of religious socialists. Like I have comrades who are Islamic, they or Muslim. I have comrades who are Jewish. I have comrades who are Buddhist. Um, Across the world. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if um, there was at least a dozen religions in my international alone, and that's probably a very conservative estimate. Religious people, um, actually, one prominent example of um, an religious person who at least has socialist sympathies, if not a socialist herself, is one of my heroes, Malala Yousafzai, who was shot by the Taliban for advocating for women's rights and education, um, but has spoken or delivered a message to a Pakistani Trotskyist group that had actually split from my current international, the CWI, about how we're equal and about socialism. So to me, once again, it's just reinforcement. It's not a contradiction in my mind.
Thank you. That was very articulate. I I love that answer. All right, so should we move back then to other accomplishments of countries?
Yeah. The other one I wanted to talk about is Burkina Faso. So Burkina Faso, before it was became Burkina Faso, was Upper Volta. It was colonized by the French because the French and the English like to do that. Um, and so there was this guy, his name was Thomas Sankara, and he won an election um, as an open socialist. Um, and Thomas Sankara transformed Upper Volta um, into Burkina Faso very rapidly. He lived for only 4 more years after his election. He ruled from 1983 to 1987 and was assassinated because he pissed off the ruling class
Yeah.
of the world. But here's what happens in Burkina Faso under Thomas Sankara's leadership. There's an increase in school attendance from 8 to 22%. That's almost triple enrollment in schools. He started a mass vaccination program against polio and others and had a high vaccination rate across the country. The first time since before the colonization by France, women had high leadership positions in government, and Thomas Sankara himself was very feminist and believed that women were equal to men. He also outlawed female genital mutilation, which was a very common practice in that part of Africa, um, especially since France's occupation. Um, he made Burkina Faso more self-reliant, able to provide for themselves. He was a very huge advocate against foreign aid because and I can't quote this exactly, but he talks about how a lot of foreign aid is rice and food itself. And he's like, if these people actually wanted to help us, they would give us technology so that we could do this ourselves. So if they're not going to
Yeah.
do that, we're not going to accept it. Um, and Sankara really helped lead the country to a better position until he was assassinated. And sadly, Burkina Faso deteriorated after that. He was a well respected leader who was just assassinated because he ticked off the French ruling class. He ticked off some of the tribal leaders who had been using free labor for centuries. And all these people who um, didn't want to see this society where everyone had their needs provided for, where things were that it was just pure reaction. But the legacy of what Thomas Sankara did can't be ignored. And on top of all that, he was a jazz guitarist.
Oh, shoot. That's awesome. I love
Rest
it.
in peace.
R.I.P. That always makes me think. So I was in a fraternity in college. It was a band fraternity, and it's so stupid. Bill Clinton is also in my fraternity because he plays the saxophone, and Chuck Norris is in my fraternity because I think he plays.
I'm so
trumpet.
sorry.
It is what it is, you know. Whatever. All right. So I think this will be the end of number 2. So thank you again, Matthew, for joining me for this second very special episode. And you will be joining us once again for the next one to talk about your group.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, this has been great. All right, Shannon, that's the end. Okay, number 3, starting now. I have to write down the time really quick. 1:15. Okay. Hello, welcome back. This is the very special episode of the Triad with me and my friend Matthew.
Hello.
His comradeliness. Okay, so today we are going to be continuing our discussion about communism, and more specifically, well, is there anything else you want to tell us that we haven't covered yet?
Well, I think I definitely want to talk about the political organization I'm in and kind of the historical roots of Trotskyism a bit, if you have the time for that.
Of course. All right. Let's just jump right in then. Go for it.
All right. So, as I had mentioned back in the first episode, I am a member of the Independent Socialist Group, which is a U.S. Communist organization that right now we're pretty small, but we're only in our second year of being an organization, but we have 72 people. And we are in political solidarity with the Committee for Workers International, International Socialist Organization, with member organizations and parties in 17 countries. So our historical roots come from Trotskyism. And we had talked about Stalinism, communism, all these things. And now I'm throwing another political ideology at you, and it's
Let's
Trotskyism.
get learned.
Yes. So one of the things that that we know as Stalinism, Stalinists themselves refer to themselves as Marxist-Leninists, which is, to a Trotskyist like us, inherently offensive because it implies that Stalin had the inherent legacy of Lenin's philosophy, which he didn't. Um, in fact, a lot of his actions, as we've talked about before, went against everything that Lenin had written about in things like the State and Revolution, or um, or just any previous iteration of what communism should be. So there's this guy, Leon Trotsky. Him and Lenin were not friends all the time. They fought quite a bit between 1905 and 1917. Um, but Trotsky in 1917, after the Mensheviks really had failed in the February Revolution to deliver the promises of peace, land, and bread, realized that Lenin was right and that he should join the Bolsheviks, and ultimately was a leader in the revolution, um, and had been for quite some time respected in the Petrograd Soviet, which he led for a number of years. Um, Trotsky would lead the Red Army um, in the Russian Civil War, and found out surprisingly that he was competent enough as a military general to not only defeat the Tsarist forces, but also to defeat the invading supporters from the other imperialist countries of the world. In the middle of World War One, countries that were fighting against each other, Germany, France, United States, Britain, um, and Japan, multiple imperial powers sent small contingents into Russia to try and quash the Russian Revolution, because they knew that communism was a threat to the capitalism that they were trying to build. And Trotsky really helped to lead the Red Army to victory in that civil war and against those invading armies. So Trotsky, in those um, first few years, while Lenin's still in power, um, really has a vital role as the as the commissar of war, and he's also very big into theory. He has two really big political theories that were huge contributions to Marxism. One was the transitional program. The second was permanent revolution. So permanent revolution, we're going to start with that one, is the first of these. And it was developed around 1903, 1905, where Trotsky makes the argument that socialism can be fought for in a country that has not yet experienced capitalism. This is something that Marx was starting to get to in his later years before he died, but had previously said there's a clear line from feudalism to capitalism to socialism, so you have to have capitalism before socialism, which he was revising, but he died. And Trotsky kind of picked up where that was left off and says the working class can actually, for themselves, take up the task of the industrialization of the economy and creating a socialist society, and not requiring the capitalist class um, to 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 become powerful. In fact, it's pretty ripe for socialists to revolt in a feudal society, because the capitalist class hasn't gained the power that is necessary to develop capitalism yet. So they are actually at their weakest. Um, and this is exactly what happened in the Soviet in the Russian Revolution. The working class fought and won, and tried to take up the task of bringing the um, going through the tasks of the capitalist class into socialism. Um, and so, as part of doing that, you know, he never left the idea of um, communist internationalism. We still needed, what would help is if um, revolts were successful in already industrialized countries, because they have technology and education that Russia just did not have at that time. Um, but um, it, it never worked out that way. The second theory that I want to talk about, the transitional program, uh, is basically a way that um, socialists can make demands. Um, so one of the things, and I'm going to use contemporary examples for this, that we can think of that's a popular demand, and we'll call it a minimal demand, which is what Trotsky would call it, um, is the Medicare for all in the United States. Um, so when you take Medicare for all, that's absolutely something that we approve of. We want socialized medicine. We want healthcare to be free, but we want more than that. So it's our duty to take that demand and bring it to the next logical conclusion. Um, this is kind of like a middle ground demand. I forget the term for it. Um, but um, so on top of having publicly funded healthcare, we want to make sure that we take healthcare itself under public ownership, the pharmaceutical companies, the hospitals, everything else, so that we're not letting capitalists charge the state um, ridiculous amounts just because they're paying for everything, right? We need to
Yeah.
make sure that this is occurring. And we also have to connect that into actually developing the socialist state and making people realize that just because we address an issue in capitalism doesn't mean that we've solved the problem. We maybe have made it easier. We maybe have um, helped things, but things that are won under capitalism can be revoked. Um, and we've seen that. We've seen in the United States the rise and fall of unions. We've seen the rise and fall of certain rights. Just because you win a right in the legislative arena doesn't mean it can't be taken away. And the only way to ensure that those rights remain is is to develop the socialist state and go into communism. So that's uh, kind of the philosophy that we're building off of. So anytime that we see demands around even police brutality, when people were talking about body cams, we're like, okay, that's great, but they can still turn them off. They can still do this. They can still do that. We need to make sure that police um, are subject to independent members of the community who can look into and make sure that they're not committing brutal acts. Uh, and it, and in order to end all this oppression to begin, in the end, we also just need to make sure that the need for this special body of armed people um, is working actually for the workers and not for the defense of capital, which can only be achieved in a socialist country. Um, so those are just like a couple of the examples. Um, you know, and we've fought a lot of campaigns. Currently, just in Worcester, where a lot of Worcester, Massachusetts, I should specify, where kind of the I would say plurality of our organization is right now, just because a lot of um, the split that occurred to create us was done mainly in Worcester. Um, One of the things that we're working on is Amazon is trying to set up a fulfillment center in in a former in a site of the former Greendale Mall. For anyone outside of Worcester, that means nothing. Um, but for us, we're looking at this and saying, well, that land can be used for public housing. It can be used for a medical facility for low income people. It can be used for childcare. It can be used for all these different things. But we're going to give it to a company that has one of the most major abuses of labor in the United States. And we're advocating against that actively. Um, Actually, later today, I'm going to be going to a picket line to.
I
Um,
was just about to ask that if that was where you were picketing today.
yeah, no, it's not where I'm picketing today, but I'm going to be in Worcester. I'm picketing at a hospital that is for profit. Uh,
Mm.
and this is going to make you cringe, Hannah. Its name is St. Vincent's. Um,
No, no. Are you
because
crazy?
well, it was bought by a company in Dallas,
Oh, that
Texas.
makes me
You know,
ill.
a few like you know a 1,000+ miles away from Worcester, Massachusetts. Um,
Arf.
and what they have done since the pandemic is the occupancy of the beds have obviously gone up as the pandemic has spiked, but they
Yeah.
have not increased the staffing for the nurses. So the nurse to patient ratio is at alarming rates. The nurses are stressed. I'm joining their picket line today to help them at
And
least
yeah,
make a
as the
case,
child
show
of a
that the
nurse,
community.
that's insane.
Yeah, yeah,
I think.
it's absolutely ludicrous. And so these are the kind of things that socialists are doing day in, day out. We're not just like protesting whenever. We're there when the community needs us.
Yeah.
And the way that we're intervening, is bringing our perspectives and everything into it. Um, because a lot of these movements are also just co-opted by capitalists who want um, a kinder, gentler capitalism. So, if we take, for example, a lot of the feminist movements in the country, it's centered around having more women CEOs and all that kind of stuff. That's not the feminism I want. I don't want the success of one woman to be off the back of thousands of other working women. That's not
Yeah.
what this is supposed to be. We're not supposed to see um, people making millions while other people are starving to death on the streets. So we're bringing
Right.
that perspective. Yes, we want women to make the same as men for the same work. Yes, we are in the feminist movement, but we don't want to see bourgeois feminism because that will not remove the barriers historical that are against the women um, are in the working class. It just won't help them.
Right.
So we need to be there. So these are the kind of things that we're bringing into the fight.
I had a question for, well, before I ask you, this is just something I see all
Yeah,
the time, and I kind of think it's a little bit ludicrous, but I'm going to send this picture on the Discord. Can you see it?
I can.
How does this make you feel? And I
I
picked this one specifically because if you look in the orange, it says Catholicism. So I sent Matthew a picture. It's the political horseshoe theory where it loops around so that communism and fascism end up on the same side of the spectrum because they're considered fringe. Um, but I I don't know. How does this make you feel?
um, God, there's a great meme about this, um, and I want to quote it right. I know I have it somewhere, but
Yeah, take your time,
essentially.
dig it up.
Yeah, I'm gonna quote it because I have to find it because I have to. Yes, I just found it. So it looks like a tweet from um, at Sam underscore Chris, and it says, "Horseshoe theory is when you say fascism and socialism are the same thing, and then I hit you in the head with a horseshoe." And that sums up my feelings.
Excellent.
But so there is a little bit of understanding behind this, and I'm going to kind of explain why. And so there's a word that liberals and leftists use kind of generously, and that word is fascism. Um, you'll hear all the time, "Oh, uh, Trump is a fascist," and you know, it would take me an hour to go through this oftentimes, but let's talk about what fascism is. Fascism requires a social movement. Fascism requires the regimentation of the economy.
Yeah, the
Um,
Nazis were the National Socialist Party.
right, right. And so they have socialists in the name, so therefore um, they must be socialists. Is the common thought, which couldn't be further from the truth. Socialists believe in racial equality. In case you missed it, the Nazis didn't.
Yeah, they're
Um,
very much against that, I believe.
um, and but for fascism, a lot of the people who fall for it are the same people who, if we were able to get to them, um, would also join us. But it takes someone to actually get out there to these people, right? Because the commonality between fascism and socialism is that um, both of them say, hey, there are people who are um, the problems that you're experiencing under capitalism aren't your fault. The socialists say, well, you see, there are these people who own the means of production that are underpaying you, blah, 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 all these conditions. They are the source of all of this. We need to build a new society in which all of us can survive. The fascists will often um, come up with these historical conspiracy theories, but to someone who's experiencing economic hardship, when they hear it's not their fault, and when they hear, um, there's someone else to blame, they're going to go for it. And there is some truth behind that. It isn't their fault, but who the fascists are pointing to is often incredibly misleading. If you look at the QAnon conspiracies, I mean, absolutely out of this world. Some of those people are too far down the rabbit hole to actually be brought to the left now. But those people prior might have actually been attracted to socialism if we were able to get there as a working class, as a strong movement with a strong message that was as accessible as what Trump is saying.
Mhm.
Trump got a huge platform to spout his ideas. He's on media. He's all over the place, and he's giving particularly white Americans who are disenfranchised a person to blame. But the people he's giving them to blame is blacks or Mexicans coming over the border. Um, he is pointing out the political establishment isn't working for them. And that's true. These people voted for Trump because they did not see their conditions improve under George W. Bush or Barack Obama. They were largely ignored. If if the Democratic Party had actually taken initiative, and this is why we don't organize with the Democratic Party, and actually made living conditions better for these people, they would never have gone to Trump. This is why we're advocating on the left. This is why they can go either way. But it's not because our politics are close. Our politics are very, very opposite. But the people who can get into those politics, the people who understand that something is rigged against them, can fall for either or.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for explaining that. Yeah, I've seen this this horseshoe theory, quote unquote, time and time again, and I've always just thought it a little bit comical. But yeah, your explanation of it really does make sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, here's another good one with a
Uh
oh, it's got Trotskyism right up there on the top with Nazism. Okay, I won't even throw it to you.
Yeah,
Uh,
don't. Oh, don't you dare!
I won't.
Trotsky
Um,
has a great quote that I love, and I think I've sent it to you before. But it is, if you cannot convince a fascist, acquaint his head with the pavement.
yes, we almost posted that. Well, not really, but I wanted that to be our post for our Instagram the other day, but I was ruled out. Um, however, this thing that I just clicked on, the horseshoe, comes from CatholicEvangelical.com, and that makes me rather upset.
Yeah, it is. incredibly boggling to me to see. Um, I mean, I understand the historical conditions that led to the Catholic Church being a predominantly right wing entity. But
Yeah.
when you look at kind of what it's supposed to espouse, right? The treating people with dignity, um, sacrificing your excesses so that all can, so that the poor can also um, thrive. Um, the whole quote about it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to get into heaven somehow ends up with the Catholic Church being this entity that is very right wing, and
I
um,
know, it's
it's
very
huge
disturbing.
dissonance.
Yeah, I'm sure people wonder how um two incredibly uh liberal people, you and I suppose, are
And don't be calling me a liberal now.
okay, well, you know what I mean. Um just how we can live with this duality, the
Mhm.
Catholicism and the, you know, don't be a um conservative.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's very hard sometimes, but
And of course,
I
you and I have both talked about where the Catholic Church as an institution needs to improve, and as far as
oh yeah,
um,
for sure.
how it treats people of different sexual orientations and gender identities. The Catholic Church has a long, long way to go. Um, and this isn't as what anything that I say. I should qualify this. Anything I say about the Catholic Church here is not an analysis by my organization. This is as my personal
No,
experience
no,
as a Catholic.
this is just us speaking on our personal beliefs.
Um, and so, um, I'm not sure that the Catholic Church can ever be reformed to the point we get it. It's not going to stop me from trying, but
Yeah.
um, or if they can excommunicate me, if that happens, well, then
Come
here
at
we
me,
are.
Francis.
Yeah, I don't think it would happen under Francis, but he won't be
Oh,
there
I think.
forever.
Well, that's to end on a low note. Do you have
And
anything
yeah,
else?
no, let's find something happy to talk about to finish this off, huh?
Yeah. You wanna promote
Um,
your stuff? Your group stuff?
yeah, and actually, I they this part Hannah will probably want to. Not Hannah. You're Hannah. Shannon
I'm
will
Hannah.
probably want to. Oh God. But they wanted to just since this is pretty soon after the events that happened in DC the other day, um, kind of
Yes.
um, our response to that and everything else.
Oh, yeah, let us know. What's up? What do you guys think about it?
Do you have a way to segue into that?
Uh, just how does your group feel about what okay, so this recording, because when this is posted, it'll be months from now, but this is happening way in the past, and lunatics just tried to take over the Capitol a few days ago. So how did your group respond to that?
Yeah. So as far as the events at the Capitol on January 6th goes, um, obviously it was something that caught everyone's attention. I want to say, first of all, that I am surprised this didn't happen sooner. This rhetoric, this kind of buildup has been occurring. I know some people have joked about the quote unquote Civil War, um, but it was largely ignored. And what we're looking at with this, I don't want to call it an insurrection. I don't want to call it a revolution. Those are not accurate. This was not an organized attempt um, to create something entirely new. Um, this was an angry group of people who tried to just get who actually believed that Donald Trump won the election, and tried to riot, I think is the right word. Um,
Hmm.
and when you see this kind of response, the fact that they were able to get in through the door even at first, um, should be an indicator of a couple of things, right? Because when we talk about the Black Lives Matter protests that happened in DC, I mean, the full force of the state was out and ready. Um, if the Black Lives Matters protesters had tried to storm Congress, uh, a lot of them would be dead. A lot more would be arrested than what we saw on January 6th. But that's because the these rioters were not threatening the general interests of capitalism. Were they attacking the quote unquote democratic institutions of the United States? Maybe that's not how they viewed themselves. Um, if it was a bunch of socialists who were storming Congress, it would we would absolutely say, well, yeah, we don't like the Constitution, and here's a million reasons why, and here's why we're going to change society. Um,
Here's our
but these
95 theses. So,
exactly. Um, so uh, it with the events that happened on January 6th, we can see a couple of things. One is that capitalism is in crisis. And this is a very telling time. This is the whole reason Trump was elected to begin with. People we're hearing about this economic recovery since a Great Recession. Um, but once again, those same groups of people that we talked about who had been disenfranchised and never saw their conditions improve under the Obama administration were like, recovery, what? And yeah, that's absolutely fair. There, the this recovery is only for um, the wealthy, the ruling class. Um, Anytime that you recover from a recession, all that does is the ruling class consolidates even more and more power. They buy assets for pennies on the dollar after people lose them. People lost their houses um, because of the Great Recession. And what happened? Well, rich people came in and bought them up for less than that they were worth, and now they're trying to sell them for a lot more. Um, and their control and wealth is increasing. That's not a recovery. That's just that is looting in its most pure form. Um, so when these protesters were there, the reason that security wasn't so high is they weren't threatening the general of capitalism. They were they were threatening something, but every time you have a movement like Black Lives Matter or a feminist movement, those maybe not inherently um, challenge capitalism, but they do to a degree. And there's always people in those groups who do challenge capitalism and its rules. Um, because all of what we talked about, the family structure, the construct of race itself is developed to keep capitalism in power. Um, so when it comes to all of that, when it comes to this riot, this unseemly thing that happened on January 6th, we're seeing the crisis being put in on full display, and this is the time where if the working class organizations don't get organized, don't recruit, um, it's going to be, as Rosa Luxemburg put it, either socialism or barbarism. And we're darn well sure hoping for socialism.
wow. Well, thank you very much for that answer. Matthew, thank you so much for being on this very special episode of the Triad today. Would you like to tell us where we can find you and your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're interested in finding out more about our perspectives or like what you hear and are interested in joining, if you're in the US, you can reach us at independentsocialistgroup.org. I mean, you can still check out our website if you're international to read our articles, look at our perspectives. Um, the website for our international, the Committee for a Workers International, is socialistworld.net. There you can see the organizations in the 17 countries that we have. Um, we also have a podcast, our international does, that's titled Socialism Today. It's a CWI podcast. Um, so definitely check us out. Reach out to us. We're happy. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, I want to say Instagram. Um, that once again is Independent Socialist Group for the US group, and then the international is Committee for Workers International, or CWI.
All right. Well, thank you so much again for being on this very special episode of the Triad, and I hope all of our listeners are now interested in your cause and go and try to find you guys online.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Hannah.
Of course. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for listening to The Triad. Our music is by Scott Buckley. Our audio is recorded by our sound engineers, Craig Bott and Audrey Credo.
If you like the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Tumblr as The Triad Podcast. Our website is thetriadpodcast.wordpress.com. There, you can find information about our latest episode, including the show notes and sources.
We're also on Patreon as The Triad. Currently, all Patreon funds will go towards the cost of hosting the show. Each tier has its own rewards, but every patron receives our undying gratitude. Do you have comments, questions, or stories? Email us at thetriadpod@gmail.com. And thank you again for listening to The Triad, where we're spooky but sensitive.